Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Intisar Fakir. I'm a senior fellow and the director of MEI's North Africa and Sahel program. It's my pleasure to host this panel today to talk about Tunisia and the constitutional revision that is happening in the country and the referendum that will vote on the new constitution on Monday. I would like to get us started very quickly. So let me introduce our panelists here today. We have a really excellent panel with us today. We have Saied Al-Ali. Saied Al-Ali is a senior advisor on constitution building for the Arab region at the International IDEA. We had the pleasure of co-hosting Zaid's a launch for your book, Arab Constitutionalism, which I highly recommend to anyone who wants to understand what's happening in the Middle East right now. So welcome and thanks for being with us, Zaid. Second up is Mona Ben Halima. She is the founder and CEO of Hotel La Badira in Hammamat. Mona also serves on the advisory council of the North Africa and Sahel program here. And it's a pleasure to have her contributing from her perspective and also about her involvement with civil society. Mona has had a long experience working with civil society groups throughout Tunisia. And finally, we also have Rafiq Halwani with us. Rafiq is the co-founder and former director of Muraqibun. He has a vast experience with electoral systems and electoral observation, not only in Tunisia, but throughout North Africa and Africa as well. So welcome all. It's a pleasure to have you here. And I would like to get the conversation started with you, Zaid. I was wondering if you can talk us a little bit through what these constitutional revisions are, what do they involve, and how is this different from the 2014 constitution that was celebrated in Tunisia and was really held up as a model for an inclusive, democratic constitution?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks very much to the Institute for organizing this, and thank you, Intisar, for hosting this event and for having me. So, I mean, the first thing is that I don't think we can speak of a revision. A revision suggests that you have an existing text and that you're revising it, you're making amendments to it, and then you're consolidating everything into a new text. This is really a new constitution. There's not much that's left over from the 2014 constitution. So, when so much has changed, it's difficult to speak of a revision or an amendment. So that's the first thing. And then if you asked what the differences are with 2014 and you talked about the inclusive nature of 2014. So maybe I'll start with process. The 2014 constitution was really the result of a negotiated process. So you had different political forces. Nahda was the biggest one, but there were many others, many of which sort of like coalesced within groupings of parties that negotiated together a text. It was an iterative process. There were several drafts that were published and many comments were made. Some people got very upset when some of the drafts were circulated, often with reason. And then eventually there was an informal dialogue process that led to the completion of the text eventually, right? So it really involved a lot of voices. I mean, and in that sense, it was held up as a model because they were able to reach agreement despite the fact that it was negotiated. There were still many serious flaws, which I can get into afterwards if you'd like me to discuss that. But at the very least, what we're talking about is differences between 2014 and today. Is the starting point is that this current process today is not the result of a negotiated or negotiation or dialogue. A consultation was organized, and then a commission was formed that was tasked with preparing a draft. But then the draft that was ultimately produced was not connected or very loosely connected with the product of the commission. We're not exactly sure who prepared the final draft, but in any event, the commission that prepared the draft, denounced it and said that his views weren't taken into consideration, the views of the commission weren't taken into consideration, and said that he wouldn't be supporting the constitution. So it's clear that this consultational dialogue spirit that existed in 2014, which once again had its flaws. I'm not trying to hold it up as a model with some serious problems, but be that as it may, the dialogue that did take place with its flaws is greatly reduced on this occasion, practically non-existent. You have a text that's basically the product of either the president directly himself or individuals that are so close to him that we don't even know who they are. And we're not sure how they were inspired. They certainly weren't inspired, only marginally inspired by the work of the commission that the president handpicked and put together himself. So that's in terms of process. And in terms of substance, so the proposed constitution that's being put to referendum on Monday has much more in common with the 1959 constitution than it does with the 2014 constitution. I mean, the 2014 constitution was a mixed text, so it a mixed system of government. So it provided parliament with a significant amount of powers and also established a presidency that also had a significant amount of powers. And the idea was that these two institutions, the presidency and the parliament, would work together with a view to formulating policy jointly and working together to oversee the implementation of state policy. This current text that's being proposed and that'll be put to referendum on Monday does not do that. It firmly places policy formation and policy implementation in the hands of the president. So it's not a presidential system only, it's what's referred to often as a hyper-presidential system. And what that means is that there's a distinction to be drawn between a presidential system like you see, for example, in the US, where the American president has significant amount of powers, there's no question, and what's being proposed in Tunisia currently. And I'll just give you one or two examples of the differences between them. One major difference is that in the United States, a presidential system, there are no circumstances in which the president can dissolve Congress. It's not provided for at all. That possibility simply does not exist. Whereas in a hyper-presidential system of the type that you see, for example, Tunisia's 1959 constitution, the current proposed constitution, the Algerian constitution, the Egyptian constitution, if parliament gets too rowdy and resists the president too much, then the president can dissolve parliament, right? So, and that might be fine in some circumstances, because if parliament is so dysfunctional, you might need a solution of some type, and so therefore you dissolve it. But the problem is that what the opposite side, or that's a dual-edged sword, in the sense that if it's the person who occupies the presidency that's the source of the problem, if it's the person who's at the tip of the pyramid, who has all this power to formulate policy, to form a cabinet on his own, to oversee the implementation of policy completely on his own, if it's that person who isn't capable of formulating policy in a meaningful way that's answering the problems of the country, if it's that person who's not capable of forming a cabinet that's capable of implementing that policy, then the president has the option of punishing the parliament, dissolving parliament. And parliament has no means in that system to hold the president accountable. There's nothing that can be done. All you have to do, if a president has been elected under this system, and within a year, there's consent to formulate policy and can't do anything, there's nothing you can do. You have to wait until the end of the term. And I mean that's a real problem, And so if what we're talking about is differences between the 2014 constitution and the proposed constitution, is that there's no sense of balance between the different branches of government in this proposed constitution. There's a huge amount of authorities concentrated in the hands of the presidency, the individual president of the republic, and other branches, meaning parliament, the judiciary, was referred to sometimes as the fourth branch, meaning independent institutions, are totally subservient to the one individual who is the presidency, the person who occupies the presidency. And in that context, basically the country is left at the mercy of a single individual, right? And that may turn out fine if you're lucky, And it turns out that the person who's in control is enlightened and very, very smart and can deal with everything in a mature and constructive way. But if you're not lucky and it turns out that the person that occupies the presidency is human like the rest of us and makes lots of mistakes, right, then you're in trouble because you can't do anything to control the person. You can't do anything to hold the person accountable. You're just totally left to the person's devices. And with time, what we've learned since the end of the colonial period, this is one sentence, if you'll, the colonial period, is that always what ends up happening is that the person who occupies the position ends up staying in power for very extended periods of time. And during that period of time, makes it extremely difficult to challenge that person's authority.
And you had made this point in one of your recent pieces that you had written for the Washington Post, where you talked about the fact that he can effectively extend the presidential limits, the presidential term beyond a 2-term limit. But let me ask you one very quick question before moving on to Mona. Can you talk a little bit about freedoms and liberties? How are they different in the current draft, in this new constitution?
Okay, not so the provisions on the provisions on basic rights, the definitions are given, the draft and so on, are not significantly different to what was in the 2014 Constitution. Originally it was, but then an amendment was made, a change was made to the draft Constitution a few days later, and that's brought it more closely in line with the 2014 Constitution. Say, this is your freedom of expression, you have the right to association, you have the right to other rights and so on and so forth. But it's a totally other thing to have an institutional setup that's designed to protect the implementation of those rights and to protect them from executive encroachments, right? Because that's what ends up happening in practice, is that rights are always limited in some way or another. And what ends up happening in practice is that executives always try to go further and further and further, not just in Tunisia, everywhere, right? Try to keep on going further and further and encroaching and limiting those rights, okay? And what you would hope for is an institutional setup, including a judiciary, which is capable of standing up to strong executives and encroachments of the executive, that will then oversee or look into decisions that were made by the executive or laws that were passed by the parliament and decide that those limitations go too far and therefore they're deemed to be unconstitutional and therefore are canceled, right? That's what you would hope for. But on this setup, when all branches of government are subservient to the presidency, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it makes it much more difficult to do that.
Great, thanks. Mona, let me come to you. I'd like you to do 2 things for our audience, if you can. First, I want to get a sense of how are the different sort of segments of political life, civil society, how are they organizing to respond to what Saied is proposing? And the second thing is, can you also help us sort of contextualize this in terms of the economy? You know, how is this going to affect the business community? What is going on in terms of the current economic conversation, the negotiation with the IMF? How should we make sense of this new constitution in this context?
Thank you, Intisar, and thank you for organizing this webinar. So, concerning the political opposition, the most widely shared position is the boycott of the referendum. Political opposition reject the whole process. They consider it illegal and unconstitutional. They think that any participation would give more legitimacy to the president's approach. Another reason is the lack of confidence they have about the transparency of the vote. Rafiq later on will speak about the observer, but there will be 11,000 polling stations and the opposition recognized they won't be able to observe this large number. So they suspect fraud, they are not confident, especially since the EZ, so the EZ is the Election Council, is close to the president because he placed his own people inside it. So if they think the EZ will cheat on results, They could think also that the EZ can cheat on the participation rate, I think. Maybe they also, this party are not aware, or think they are not enough representative and prefer to call for the boycott than recognizing their lack of echo among the population. It's more or less surprising because there are big parties such as the PDL or Atayar who had more or less large parliamentary groups and the dissolved National Assembly, and the polls credit them with 30% of voting intention. So somehow calls for the boycott can, instead of the no, cannot be understood. The opposition is maybe missing a possibility to beat Qais Saied at his own game. When we remember that between January and March, Qais Saied called for organized a national consultation on the web, and despite the use of all the public structures, he had big difficulties in reaching 500,000 participants in 3 months of campaigning. So maybe his ability to mobilize might be overestimated by public opinion. We'll see this within 3 days. So another point concerning the boycott, in December, Qais Saied announced parliamentary elections. So if the opposition parties assert that the process is illegal, how could this party participate into the parliamentary elections? So still the big worry is finally the lack of an alternative, or the total absence of a credible alternative, both for the supporters of the boycott and for the supporters of the no. Concerning the civil society, the meetings are very stormy these days because a large number of associations is facing internal conflicts. They are divided as to the attitude to adopt. Within a same structure, there are members who are totally obsessed by the possibility of the return of the Islamists to power. So they push for a yes vote, even if they, in oath, they recognize the constitution is not as in the level they wanted it to be. But others argue, of course, for a boycott, and still others for a no vote. So finally, the image we had for 10 years of a strong civil society collapsed. Qais Saied succeeded, I think, in dividing all the structures, the parties, associations, unions, professional corporations. So all these people now are not aware finally that it's like it's as if they are giving up finally the battle or the fight for these 10 years of building the democracy. The best example is the UGTT. So the UGTT is the biggest, the powerful labor union. In the beginning of the campaign, the union registered at the EZ, which is once again the election council, to participate into the campaign, and then they withdrew and they didn't even give any voting instructions to their members, even if the general secretary clearly declared his disagreement with the president's approach. So maybe it's a fear, or it's more likely to be internal disagreement between the members. All these people calling for boycott, they think that with the massive mobilization of the street, they will be able to stop Qais Saied and to impose a national dialogue. But I think the street is no longer moving. People are mainly concerned by their social situation, by their daily life, by the galloping inflation, by the unemployment, by the declining of public school, the declining of the healthcare, the declining of public transport. Tunisians are really exhausted and they are in rejection of all the political parties. They want more for democracy. The street will more likely move in a few months or maybe even in a few weeks if the social situation keeps getting worse. And the move will be in rejection of the parties, which they accuse of being responsible for this degradation of the country for the last 10 years. When I say degradation, I'm speaking about the economical and social situation. So in conclusion, it's as if the opposition has given up by this call to the boycott. There is a few exceptions, such as, for example, a party called Affair, which calls for a no vote, but alone it won't weigh so much. So this is concerning the opposition. Even when we see in the streets, there are no any campaign. The walls are empty. We don't feel really an ambience, a mood of electoral campaign, because the law allowed individual to participate. So individual can maybe put some poster on his street or his neighborhood, but not in a national dimension. So concerning the business community, we feel more or less since a year, since last July, that the fear is back as under Ben Ali. And the business leaders are keeping low profile, avoiding attention. I think, like everywhere in the world, naturally, they position themselves on the side of the power. We can cite the example of the UTICA. So the UTICA is the biggest employers association in the country. They agreed to take part in the pseudo advisory committee, which Saied was speaking about now, who was in charge of preparation for a draft of the constitution in June. This committee was exclusively composed by yes people. And despite this, their recommendations were not taken into consideration in the final version of the text diffused by Saied, published by Saied. So he broke trust even with the people who were supposed being the most close to him. Members of this committee, most members of this committee denounced this, but the UTICA remained silent. I think private sector, as with the 23 years of the dictatorship under Ben Ali, is less concerned with the constitution than with economical reforms. Tunisia is a country that is over-administered, where the public administration is archaic, is omnipresent, is in control of all stages of implementing projects. So this lack of confidence on both sides does not really encourage investment. And business community is waiting for the reform for the last 12 years, and nothing has been done. We have spent 12 years only speaking about politics and never about economy. So we are very behind of the reform to undertake to restart growth. And to avoid collapse, we urgently need to conclude an agreement with the IMF. So the IMF have just concluded a 2 weeks mission. And yesterday, 2 days ago, in their press release, they conclude that the mission finished with good progress. What is surprising is a few months ago, the IMF asked for two main conditions previous to any new agreement, to even any new discussion. The first condition was the start of the economic reforms by the government, and the second condition was an agreement with the unions. None of these 2 points had begun, and strangely, they conclude their press release speaking about good progress, and we feel these conditions are no longer required. So why? Maybe they decide not to let the country collapse because we are really in a risk not to pay wages the next month or the month in the few next months. So to conclude, I think that the democratic construction started 10 years ago is slowly but surely closing in because of the chronic divisions inside the opposition, their inability to build an alternative, also because the very bad economic situation, which pushed the Tunisian to think that democracy doesn't bring prosperity, and that life finally was better under the dictatorship. Many people are speaking loud and saying this. The poor image also of the political parties negotiating in the National Assembly for the last 10 years disgusted Tunisians about politics. So to conclude, I think that finally a large number of Tunisians seem to prefer order to freedom and to rights. So maybe this can explain the lack of involvement of the population to the whole process of this referendum.
Oh, that is remarkable. When I was in Tunis last week, and it was really, it was remarkable the extent to which there was zero discussion about, at least on the street, zero concern with the referendum. And I think to the extent that the new constitution takes power away from parliament, which is an institution that, as you explained, Tunisians really have come to despise. I think on that ground alone, we're not likely to see a lot of opposition to the new constitution. So Rafiq, I'd like to come to you, but let me just make a very quick reminder to our audience. If you'd like to submit any questions, please do so through the Q&A function, and we will take questions once we hear from Rafiq. Rafiq, I want to come to you to talk a little bit about the logistics of the process of the referendum. There's been questions about its administrative viability, its financial viability, and of course, as Mona has explained, its proximity to the president right now. Can you talk us a little bit through the process and sort of help us understand, the concerns for legitimacy that are coming up with all of this discussion of observers and EASY and the role that these different actors play?
Yeah, since 2011, when I'll say before 2011, before the revolution, organization of election in Tunisia was done by police forces, means by Ministry of Interior. So after the revolution and after several fights, we succeeded to impose that an independent body, an electoral monitoring body, will organize election in Tunisia. So, and specialists of election specialists and human rights organizations. So we were, we were really happy to see an independent body organizing and has the mastery on election organization. This started from the first election in 2011 till 2019 election, presidential and legislative or parliamentary election. After 25 of June of the last year, so we were not sure that the president, Saied, will keep the organization of election between the hands of an independent organization. So this independent body, the LISI, and we heard many rumors speaking about the aim to, or the kind of possibility to come back to the organization of election by the Ministry of Interior, maybe by the army, etc. And it was serious rumors till the point that even 3 months before till the end of February or the beginning of March, we hadn't a function in electoral body. So the EZ was really completely in a kind of non-legitimacy. So people without with their mandate finished, without parliament, we cannot replace them, because in the we were used that the parliament, the appointment of this of the council of the electoral body was appointed by the parliament. So we were in confusion, total confusion. So till the end of we will say just 1 month before the announcement or the official announcement of the referendum, so the president took the decision to change the organization of the council of the EZ, and it was not a smart decision in our point of view, because it's give more weakness to the independence of the electoral commission. So if you nominate, or if you as a president, the person who nominates and who choose the candidates, so we cannot also speak about independence and independence. So this is in terms of the constitution of the electoral commission. So it was really too late. So once the first weekend, so it's really give the impression or the perception of not being really independent, because you were directly appointed by the president. 1, 2, it doesn't give them enough time and enough framework to organize themselves and to prepare the elections. And the third one, so we had the perception that even at the level of the electoral commission, so EZ no longer has the master of its decision. For every big decision, they go back and they have some discussion with the president to take his opinion on even on the timetable or the time frame of election starting. So the process started really weak from the organization. Fortunately, there is no problem of financing of the operation, but the EZ was really weak, and it was of the weakness, one of the weakest EZ, even in terms of technically speaking. So they started, they took many wrong decisions related to the voter registration procedure and methodology. They opted for what we call it an automatic registration. So they took all the people with their ID not registered, because before in Tunisia, we used the active registration. So people, they go and they decide themselves and they present themselves to be registered to vote. So it's not automatic. Now we have the next automatic and voluntary approach. So it's kind of push and pull, and it's a kind of catastrophe. So they distributed people without any clear criteria. So people, they are not really close to their homes. With the big mistakes, they permitted to the citizen who was automatically registered, to change his voting place. So people cheated with that, because the electoral commission doesn't put enough control on the process. So also the process of control was weak. So it created a kind of confusion also in the perception and in the mindset of many people. So they don't know if they were registered, when they will vote, and this can and they will create a kind of confusion during the electoral day. So during the voting day, during the Monday 25 of July. So we'll have some queue with people they don't know. They wanted to vote and they will not allow to vote because they were not registered in these polling stations. So the process will not, the procedure, we think that they will not be really fluent during the E-Day. And this can also, the Electoral Commission could be tempted to use additional list or manual list. So it's, if you open the door to this kind of to add or to additional lists, so to accept people that are not registered in their polling stations. So it's the big, you open the doors to all kind of tricky and to kind of stuff balloting, etc. So this is one risk. We noted also that the Electoral Commission was not really, we'll say, the EZ has a big laxity in applying or in respecting the rules. So yes, there wasn't a big campaign, but we saw a big, really advertising on the street, etc. Really big. So it was using marketing tools, etc. Using the flag, using so it's paid advertising for the campaigning for the yes, and it was completely illegal, and it was on the big streets and the big road of Tunis. So it was nobody can say that it was not really seen or detected, and people they were complaining, etc. And the Electoral Commission was really lax. So it's big laxity even in the to respect rules or to make people respecting the rules. So the addition of these element, so to this element we can add the fact that this election will not be observed by NGOs and by independent civil society observers. We had around 500,000 polling station, and only 2,000 polling station will be covered by independent controller or independent watcher. So my colleagues of Muraqibun, they plan to have to be in 1,000 polling station, and all the other civil society actors will cover around 1,000. So it's nothing less than 20% of the polling station will have the presence of witnesses and independent witnesses that can have or that can bring an independent and opinion about the procedure during the E-Day. If we have a comparison, a kind of that we can compare in with the same number of polling station in 2011, more than 20,000 observers, in 2014, more than 12,000 observers, and now, so 2012, even with 12,000, you could at least have one observer by polling station. So now we have 80% of the polling station without any independent observer. And if we know that there's really election committee and we'll say the executive of the state, they are really close, and with the pressure, we have the nomination of governors or responsible in the smallest administrative layer of delegation, etc. And they are really ruling for the president. So we can have a lot of question mark about what will be their reaction during the E-Day. Especially, one of the other weakness of the process that we had the extension of the voting hours. So if we say, or we can, if we don't go to in the details, we can say we can say it's a good idea if we give more time to people to vote, but starting voting from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. it's really big time, and it brings a lot of complication, even in terms of logistics for the Electoral Commission and also for observation groups. So imagine if you want to at 5 a.m. you cannot until more than midnight, so you have to double your staff, and you have to work with two shifts and not only one shift. So all this different argument make that the process is really fragile, and there's a real risk for election manipulation. We hope that that people want to respect, or that if I'm speaking people, that the president of the states and the governor, etc., I hope that they respect the rules. My opinion, I don't think that it will be a big challenge between the yes and the no. So the big part of the people who are not convinced by the process, or who are against, they will boycott. So we will have a big yes and a small no, but the real challenge is the participation rate, is the turnover. So, and this is one of the really, it's the point to observe for this election. It's not the of the yes, the proportion of the no, but it's really the turnover. And for this, even the civil society, they are making different statements to estimate the turnover during all of the days. So this is the real challenge for this referendum, the participation rate, because this participation rate can give legitimacy or not to a process, a really weak process with a very small legitimacy. The referendum or the process of referendum, if we have a weak process with a weak electoral commission with a very weak participation rate, so it means that people are not agree with this proposition, even if legally the fact, even if with the 5% or even with 1% of turnover, if the yes is more than 51% or 15% plus one, so it will be legal but not legitimate.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so just to kind of wrap up a little bit, we have a hyper-presidential system that is likely to, constitution that is likely to pass with, a low voter turnout rate, some serious questions about its legitimacy. So let me ask you, what's going to happen after Monday? So we have the situation, there's a new constitution. Again, big questions about its legitimacy. What do you think Qais Said's, next project is going to be? Mona, you mentioned elections in December. Zaid, can you talk us a little bit through what that's going to look like once we have this constitution voted in?
Is that question addressed to me?
Well, I'd like to get your thoughts on it, and then I want to hear more from
Sure.
Mona as well, and also the others.
Well, I don't have that much to say other than that because of the arrangements that are provided for in the transitional provisions in the proposed constitution, all the legislation relating to future elections will be adopted by the president himself unilaterally.
So he will
without
write
any need
laws?
for. Well, I don't know if he's going to write them himself. Maybe he'll put together committees. I've got no idea. He'll do whatever it is that he wants to do. But he's the only authority that he needs to approve. So he might write them himself. He might put together a committee and then take their draft and then amend it. He might do as he did with the draft constitution, which is to compose a committee, receive the draft, and then not use it. I have no idea what he's planning on doing. But ultimately, there's no parliament. There's no other authority. that has any power under the transitional provisions of the proposed constitution, that needs to approve any electoral law or electoral regulation or anything of the sort. So he has unilateral power to create the electoral system that he wants and design electoral rules that he wants. He has full authority over the matter, and so he can take as long as he wants. There's no hard deadline that he's going to have to meet. Even if there were a deadline, he could change it unilaterally. There's no real pressure on him. The only types of things that can create pressure on him currently is economics, right? If there was some major social unrest because of more deterioration because of the economic situation, then he would likely make concessions. Likely he would make concessions on economics and on governance as well, with a view to trying to bring more allies into his project who would support him and so on and so forth. But otherwise, barring the absence of social unrest, I can't see any avenue to have any influence over the decision-making process. It's going to continue unilaterally as it has been over the past year.
So, Mona and Rafiq, do you think this is the end of electoral politics in Tunisia? Where, what will things look like from here on?
Well, as I said, I think that the parenthesis of the democracy in Tunisia is ending. I think we will have this president for the next 10 years, maybe more. Don't forget that we had Ben Ali for 23 years, and the street didn't move for democracy. The street only moved for social causes. So the risk is the economic, like said Saied right now. After this referendum, we don't know what will be done for economy. It seems that finally the IMF decided to support Tunisia and to support the regime. We have to know that the budget is not closed yet. So the real risk is not to pay the wages of the 700,000 people working for the state, maybe in October and November. So we will wait for the parties to position themselves for the parliamentary elections. If other parties, if they will continue calling for boycott, it's clear that Saied will lead the people, the country by himself without sharing any power. I saw in the chat some question about the union, the UGTT. One of one of our guests said he thinks UGTT is silent because they aim to share the power with the president after the referendum. I think that we had all the proofs for more than a year that the president is not able to share any part of his power. I think that the UGTT is not moving because there are, in the whole country, the fear of having, once again, the Islamists in the power is really, we feel it in the street, we feel it when we are in meetings, or we feel it when we ask people in the street. So this reject of the Islamist power and on right or in wrong, they put all the ills of the country on under the responsibility of the Islamists. So this fear is making people blind and under considering the huge risk of having back a dictatorship for the next years.
Let me just jump in with a quick question that came into the chat here about the future of Ennahda, since we're talking about Islamist parties. Do you think there will continue to be a legal party? Do you think there might be efforts to, exile or jail some of the leadership? As we saw with the recent questioning of Ghannouchi, what do you think the future holds for them?
I don't think there is a risk, because the last elections proved how unpopular they are. So normally there is no reason to forbidden the party. Maybe individual behavior, or if something illegal had been done, then okay. But the whole country to forbidden its existence, I hope no. I hope no. I hope we will continue having multiple political parties, and freedom, at least of the ideas and of speaking and sharing the ideas. But the concern, I think really that the concern is that the population is totally indifferent to all this political process.
Rafiq, do you want to weigh in on the questions about the presence of international observers?
Yeah, so the president, when we started speaking about this possibility, he was completely against, and he declared it clearly. But I think that the Electoral Commission accepted. Maybe he was just speaking for speaking. But it's the presidents, they are authorized to observe, but there's a kind of boycott. I think that one of the small mission, maybe we'll have the Carter Center with a very small mission, not like the other mission EU was used to observe with hundreds of observers. So this also, it's a kind of sign that international players, they don't have enough, we'll say, their appreciation was not really good of the electoral process of the referendum. So this is one point. The second, I want just to answer to the question of Nahda party. So independent of Nahda party as a structured party or not, but this in Tunisia we have a big percentage of persons that they are really conservatism or conservatist and close to all this brotherhood ideology. So with the umbrella of Nahda, of another party, we saw that some of ex-leader from another party, they resigned and they opened another, and they started, or they launched another party. So we'll still have this kind of population, or this part of population, conservatist and close to, and this is a fact. So it's not only about if you close a party or your or you non-authorize a party. This is a part. I cannot say how what is the weight of this 5-10%, etc. But this ideology is an important player. Now we have also the populist. It's not only in Tunisia. It's a big wave, etc. But this is we'll say it's kind of a groundswell wave in the world. What will happen after the referendum? So I think that it will depend really, or mainly on the different option will be based on the rate of the participation of the turnout. So if the turnout is high, it means that the Tunisians, they accepted the game and they played the game, and independent and the yes will be the winner, so they accepted. But if the turnout is really weak, so less than 20-25%, so it means that we can start an area of civil disobedience. So and this could be also kind of a turbulence period. So if people will not accept, we will have the president and the government that will try to pass text of laws and laws based on this new constitution. The big part of or important stakeholders will not accept it. So if the turnout is weak, I don't think that we'll have election even in December 20 in December in the last of the year, the parliamentary. So it's really I think that we should prepare ourselves to kind of turbulent environment starting from October, and in August nothing happened in Tunisia. People they have other occupation between off and swimming, etc., marriage, and weddings, etc. So the serious issue will start in October after the starting of schools and university. And so I think the option, they are open. So as I say, now we can say no more bet. So les jeux sont faits, rien ne va plus. We'll see, we'll wait and see. And I think that if we have this instability plus bad economic condition, we can see kind of troubles, social troubles, etc. And I was just to say the last things. I think that, and I agree completely with was Muna said, that we have kind of the close of this comma with the parenthèse démocratique, as we saw in 88, 89, we have it for 2 years now. We had it for almost 10, 11 years. But I think that we will have soon a kind of comeback of kind of revolution, but not revolution. I mean with so
popular support.
No. I'm sure that we will have a revolution, but not using. It will be using the soft power. We are saying, or we are watching a kind of the creation of a new kind of culture. So it will be a culture revolution, not as the Chinese one, but of Mao, but a kind of revolution that places the youth in the center, the women rights, the women rights, and also the economic rights. So people will fight. I think so. It's really still a kind of weak signal, but there's a kind of this wave starting now, and I think that it needs 1, 2, maybe 3 years, and it will completely change the rules, and this movement will bring Tunisia to the real prosperity society with human rights, with the women rights, with the place of the young, without corruption, with working on value-added economy, etc. Tunisia completely different to the populist Tunisia or to the autocratic Tunisia that we've been facing from a long time till now.
Thank you for that hopeful point, Rafiq. We have a couple more minutes, and I just want to get your thoughts a little bit on what role the international community can play. European actors, particularly, their hands are tied. I think there's been a real reluctance to push Saied. There's also been a reluctance to, starve Tunisia of funds because of the impact on citizens. So maybe give me a sense, each of you, of what you think the international community can do in these circumstances. Muna, I'll start with you.
Well, my opinion is that the international community should not do anything, because the solution have to be Tunisian. But I think Europe especially don't want to have numerous boats with illegal immigration and the south coast of Italy. because of the decline of the economical situation. I think this is why they will continue supporting, financing the debts and the economy of Tunisia. The risk for Kais Saied to maintain his power or not is only economical. So if, and he doesn't showed economic skills till now. So if he will have skilly people in the good place, beginning really economical reforms to get economic prosperity, he will have a chance, between brackets, to stay at his place, because he will have the support of the population whose first need is social, and also the business community who want the economy to grow, and they are not really concerned with the rights and the freedom. And the other side, if he will fail re-establishing prosperity, then like Rafiq said, we have a risk of social troubles in the next months, and we know how to begin, we never know how it can end.
Rafiq, let me, why don't you weigh in on the question of what the international community can do to help?
International community, as a Tunisian, we should not accept any interference from international community in the internal political affairs. So I think that international community, especially as an embassy, as the donor, technical partners, or I think that they have to support civil societies and watchdogs, because there's risk to cut of financing from the state, or to have more or strong or more less, we'll say, flexible response from the Tunisian government to the NGOs working on civil rights, human rights, and criticizing the abuse of the government, or the. So I think on this level, international community should support Tunisia, but should not interfere in the economics. I am completely against the voices that are applying IMF or the international or the European Union to stop its financial cooperation. I worked a lot in Africa, and I was recently in Mali, and I saw how the international community could really, I say, imposing sanctions. The sanction, they are not against the regime. The sanction will completely destroy the purchasing power of the population, of the poor people. So I am for the non-intervention of the international actor in Tunisia, and for the support of civil society to play its really role of watchdog and of kind of balanced power, to have kind of more balanced power, and to explain to Tunisian, because what we've done in this decade, we invested a lot on democracy. Yes, it's good. We can see that it was a democracy of facade. So it's not. We had just a fair election, but election is not democracy. So, and democracy should deliver. If we had, if you see your purchasing power completely destroyed, if you lost your jobs, etc., you cannot be for this democracy. So democracy should deliver, and this is what one of the biggest mistake of the political parties, of the political parties, and also for people of the civil societies. We were just acting on the first layer of democracy, and we didn't give a real answer to the aspiration and to the needs of the normal citizens to have the right for work, to have a good payment, a good salary, and to to can have a house, to can eat, to can travel, etc. So all this was missing, and for this we have this backsliding and in democracy, and for this we are facing this strange situation.
Thank you. Saied, you have the last word.
I don't have anything to add to those two answers. I think that was very complete.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Muna. Thank you, Rafiq. Thank you, Saied. And thank you to our viewers.